So I suppose we should introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Xueting. I'm a British Chinese writer and translator. I write about Chinese culture and also translate Chinese literature, focusing on SFF into English. Um, and yeah, so I've worked on some in various formats, including comics and um, books of poetry, prose, and the last collection I published was science fiction. I'm now working on a horror collection um, to be out in spring next year. Over to Monica.
Hi, everybody. My name is Monica Luzon. I am a writer, editor, and translator. I translate Spanish and English, back and forth with those. And my translations have appeared in a couple of different magazines, including Apex, and Constelacion. Um, and then I have a bunch of other translations that been working on, either commissioned or I solicited the authors to translate them. That some of them have been done, and I'm just shopping them around. Others are still works in progress. Um, and I've worked with Spanish-speaking authors on, I think, 4 different continents at this point, which is pretty cool. Um, and yeah, that's enough about me for now. Um, so
Oh,
go ahead.
good luck with those that you're um, sending around. I hope
Thank you.
they. I'm sure they will. It's interesting that you work across different continents in this language, and there must be, uh, I guess, regional variations in the use and the culture of that of the same language. Um,
Yeah, there's definitely some areas are for Spanish. Some ways Spanish is used are easier for my brain to process than others. So I found, like, for example, I think part of it's the literary traditions in each of the different countries around the Spanish speaking world. Um, in particular, Argentine Spanish, which I enjoy. I also find it's one of the more difficult ones to translate from because the syntax and the literary style tend to be very, very literary compared to some of the other areas of the Spanish speaking world. Um, and then,
oh, that's interesting.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes there'll be stories where I've read it and like there's one story that I've solicited from an author in Spain. I read it and I was like, "Oh, this story is excellent. I love this. I'd love to translate it." And then I started like got the permission to start working on it, and I've been working on this piece, and I it's much more dense than some of the other pieces that I'm also working on. So it's taking me a lot longer to work on or to translate just because of the density of the author's language and some of the nuances that I have to include. Um,
I do
you,
find that too sometimes. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, there are some stories that I've translated that flows a lot, as it feels like it flows a lot, very fluidly, very easily. And then there are others um, that are very dense in that they reference a lot of classical culture, for example, or historical concepts, and kind of every other sentence um, involves a kind of the principles of um, this custom or um, certain um, profession that was kind of current during this dynastic period, or or there'll be lots of quotes from classical poetry that then also need to be translated. So that's quite very enjoyable, but quite dense and slower than the other more fluid one, which may be more contemporary or kind of a more kind of everyday setting and um, more conversational kind of writing style.
As you're speaking, I was wondering if you notice whether that corresponds with, the author like, have you noticed if there's, like, specific age groups where that tends to be common or different regions where people are from? When you're reading, like, the works in Chinese and considering whether to translate or working on a translation?
Particularly age groups. I think no, they tend to be more specific to the story than to the age groups. And certainly now where we're getting a blending of genres and getting a bit of historical fiction with fantasy, um, and a bit of 武侠 xianxia with like um, kind of historical fiction or um, you or maybe the realist tradition. Um, People tend to, I think, if they're setting things in a historical period, or if they're creating an alternate world that is historicist, then they tend to have a more complicated language or um, and it depends on the style of the story as well, whether it's kind of kind of a thriller with suspense or whether it's more kind of contemplative or um, more more lyrical. I don't generally find it's down to age group or region, but however this might be peculiar to the culture that I'm working from, which is the Chinese culture where people are where the classical literature, poetry, and certain key texts were introduced back into the education system from the 80s onwards. And everybody, whether they like it or not, could recite this canon of poetry. Um, so, so even if they are younger, they are still versed in this. And it very much depends on their personal taste, whether they want to tap into that or they don't. And in fact, there's a horror story that I've just translated where the protagonist really wishes in the middle. He's kind of in the middle of at night in the wild, and he's hearing all these spooky noises. He can't see anything, and this line of poetry just comes into his head about monsters and in the mountains, and he really wishes that it it would just go away, but because he learned it in his childhood and he knows it by heart. It just keeps coming back into his head and scaring him. Um, I think that's quite kind of almost like a parody of how this kind of classical education works, or where it just stays in people's heads whether they like it or not. Um, but having said that, though um, there's increasingly more kind of other genres like crime and um, crime fiction and thrillers and um, maybe people writing more colloquial ways. There are more colloquial tones. So I think I might be rambling.
No, no,
That
I'm fascinated. I'm enjoying this. Um,
yeah.
I mean,
So it's quite specific to might be specific to the culture I'm working for. I'm working on that there's no kind of distinguishing pattern between people's age groups or region. Mm.
yeah, I don't know that I've run into the age groups thing per se. I think that question came because I was thinking about how I think some of the more authors who've been publishing longer in Spanish, sometimes, especially if they've been published like as mainstream authors and speculative fiction is a side, like where they're already more literary. I guess that's where age could come into play, but I have no idea how old many of the authors I work with are. I just work with them because they have cool stories and or they've asked me to work with them. Oh,
Yeah,
um, go ahead.
yeah. I think I have noticed that in the recent works I've translated, I think possibly there's a kind of ease or kind of yeah, there's more ease going between different narrative voices, I think, perhaps from the younger authors to the compared to the older authors. I think that's kind of maybe indicative of how literature is developing
Mhm,
in a new way,
mhm.
really. Um, is that something that you see in Hispanic literature or um,
Um, I haven't noticed it. I think it's probably there. I just haven't thought along that line necessarily while I've been um while I've been doing my translations. Because I've been reading I think most of the stuff that I've been reading for to like specifically soliciting for translation, I'm trying to use like I've been soliciting stuff that's been published more recently. So I haven't had as much time for um like within the past 5 years or so. So that there's not as much room for development per se, like in the literary tradition. It's enough to start get picking up on the different trends in the short fiction publishing, in Spanish speculative fiction, like Spanish language speculative fiction. Um, but the like I think in a few years I'll be like, I can point to these things, I can point to these examples. I'm just not there right now. Um, so when we're translating culture, um, what are some of the challenges or the things that you enjoy a lot when you're working on a translation from your culture to English language or other? I don't know if you speak any other languages that you translate into.
I mainly translate into English from um, Mandarin, although I also speak Cantonese and I can do the other way too. Um, so I think what I enjoy is maybe can be a challenge sometimes, but it's enjoyable to kind of bring my heritage culture into my secondary the culture of my second home. Uh, but there is always issues to consider, like how the kind of accessibility. Do the do the readers are they already aware of this concept, or do they need a little bit of how much of guidance or explanation do they need? Will it interrupt the story? Um, I think those are the kind of things I find quite interesting, um, sometimes challenging too. Um, but fun because they take a bit of time and consideration to work out.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so I've seen quite positive development in that. What I felt needed to explain, I need to footnote, or uh, can I put this term directly in the pinyin in romanization in the text, or do I need to translate it into an approximate term? A few years ago, when I was working on Synopticon, I now don't feel like I need to. Some of the terms, and I was saying in the previous panel that if I can find this on Wikipedia as a page for this term, then I probably people will be okay with this um, term if I just put it in romanization. Um, yeah, and I think my favorite approach is to have a glossary and maybe have a footnote, or maybe, yeah, it really depends on what the situation is. Sometimes if the concept is quite key to the story, then I would maybe weave in the meaning into the story, and so it doesn't interrupt the flow of the reading. And maybe sometimes if it's kind of an additional explanation, if it's of interest to the reader, then I probably put it in a footnote. So it depends on what the concepts are, or the key, um, or the what the nature of the concept is and how important it is to the story. And there are terms that are not there are no equivalent of. For example, I was discussing the a concept of xian, which is immortal in Chinese, a supernatural being, most commonly understood as. But then there are no, that term used to be translated as like fairy, which makes me cringe every time I hear that translation, or elf, which is not really appropriate for it either, because uh, other than that, there's attractive supernatural beings, or attractive to the West after Lord of the Rings became really popular on film. Um, yeah, so now we're starting to hear terms like immortal, um, which is more accurate, but then and or maybe celestial, because not all these xian are immortal. They may have a very long life. Some of them might be immortal, but then that doesn't represent the entire concept of this term, because it originated from the native religion of Taoism, but it can refer to someone who's a supernatural being, someone who's attained enlightenment, or someone who's transcended the earthly existence in some way. But it can also refer to somebody who's very skilled. Sometimes in Xianxia, for example, the um, swordsman, stories of swordsmen, but with supernatural mythology as well involved, they translate it as saint, which, I mean, there's another different translation, much better than fairy, or 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 celeste, better than fairy or elf. But then that's one aspect of it. Um, but that actually refers to the aspect of xian, where you have mortals, more like the Catholic canonization, where you have mortals who have done great deeds, and then towards the end of their life or after their death, they become sort of, they attain this kind of uh, godlike status, in that people create legends about them, um, and stories about them performing these supernatural, superhuman deeds, whether it's saving people from the sea or healing, for example. Um, then they become gods. It's quite similar to, but that's the Catholic saints. As I was, yeah, I was talking about the Xianxia series, where they call someone sword saints. You have Xian, where the supernatural beings, and then you have people like sword saints, which are just really skilled people with swords. They're not immortal, so that's kind of confusing. So sometimes maybe it's better to just put Xian, I think, in, especially in this day and age where people are more receptive to um, terms from a foreign language being introduced
Mhm.
to English.
Yeah, I
Um,
feel I feel like when you have a term like "cien" and there's so many different layers, it's a disservice. Like, yes, it's a cultural shorthand for the translator, but it also, like, when there's so many different layers to the concept, just using a simple word like a fairy or elf, or even saint like that, those are shorthands that
Yes.
can be lazy in a way, I guess, and do great disservice to the actual concept and the culture it's coming from. Yeah. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, no problem. I mean, have you encountered, um, I mean, what do you find interesting, fun, or challenging about translating specific cultural concepts?
I
Have
think
you had times like that?
I haven't run into per se. I think Chinese culture has just by nature of like West like European culture and like colonizing the Americas, there's a lot of ease between understanding the different cultures or the different a lot of concepts across Spanish and English, or at least like there's enough exposure that it's a little bit simpler to translate. There's not as many like there are challenging moments, but a lot of the themes that I see more from Latin American authors, there tend to be like some in some way there tends to be either a colonizer or a decolonization narrative, like a post colonial um, discussion or resistance that filters into a lot of the stories or the pieces. There's a lot of and it's not so much like the decolonization isn't so much a cultural concept to struggle with, but like when you're talking about American audiences reading a story that if where the key some of the key historical elements, I think maybe events in history become more of the cultural difficulties, like not translate for translating, because there are points where like people in the US, they don't know Dominican history, like the Dominican Republic. They don't know about certain aspects of that, or like I don't think there are a whole lot of people in the US who are super familiar with the British invasion of Argentina, like not the Falklands or las Islas Malvinas, depending on who you're talking to. I usually say Falklands. Um, the but like there are those historical events and like the big events in Latin American history that definitely don't get taught in like US schools, so you don't have those touchstones, and so then you have the analogs to like the American independence, the American Revolution, like the US. Sorry, I'm saying American because I'm falling back into the terminology from school. Um one of the things I'm trying to do is like specifically call out US history, like it's United States history. Um, that's one concept that Spanish has that English does not really have, is United Statesian. Like rather than just saying American and blanketing and ignoring all the other countries. Um, yeah, I get into debates with people about that. So I try to just refer to like the United States and then the other countries rather than blanking everybody as American, because the concept, like one of the things that you struggle with, like a cultural concept that the Americas, the continents and the different cultures struggle with, is that because the US is so prominent in global culture and has been for so long, um, a lot of other cultures have been overlooked. And so with the translations, especially from like Latin America, trying to pick pieces that are emblematic of either I try to like pull pieces that are very much like they feel like they're from those places. Like the authors are steeping the stories in culture, because I don't like I want to fight against the like homogenization of like bucketing everybody all like all those cultures. There's so many different um different like it's so there's so many rich American cultures across the continents and the Caribbean that just get overlooked. And so I try to find stories that are well written and then also introduce those concepts, like bring those new perspectives and some of the decolonizing narratives into the discussions and into the what readers are exposed to, because I want to help everybody understand one another better. I think that's a key part of why I like translating and why I care about the like doing it well, is because I want everyone like people to understand each other's cultures, and translation is a point of cultural contact in a, I guess, kind of a safe space,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I think I totally resonate with that. That's one of the main reasons why I want to translate literature too, because it's, like you say, a safe space, and it's one of the most accessible ways of introducing um, maybe some things, history or culture. Um, if it's a good story, well written, then um, people are more likely to be interested in the historical event, or the um, or remember the historical events, or kind of um, or any the decolonization process or the different cultures. Um, in that way, a story is a really good way of kind of, I think, learning or empathizing from different cultures, different perspectives. Yeah,
Yeah, it helps humanize everybody. Like it helps us remind each other that we're all humans and we have different. Everyone's got something to add value to the world that we live in.
yeah, and stories are good that they provide. If you're reading a textbook or reading a piece of news or um, something like that, then that's the facts, the events, or facts from a perspective,
Yeah.
particular angle. But then if you're reading a story, you kind of, it's more almost like a window into maybe um, someone's perspective from that culture, if it's originated by an author from that particular nation or region, and then also kind of a window into just life in general in society. And I think that helps them understand um, particular historical events. And certainly with my um, forthcoming collection of horror fiction, I found that it's been quite regional, um, in particular, both in terms of the source of the horror and the type of horror, but also each story, the author brings with them their regional cultures. In terms of, some of it has a lot of it has does have to do with history, particularly recent history, but also have to do with the customs and the terrain of the regions, particularly areas with that are very mountainous, for example, have the people, really fills people with imagination about monsters and ghosts and other, the unknown, the sense of the unknown. And they also bring their regional dialect or topolect and colloquial terms into their fiction too. And um, so I try my best to translate those authentically, um, bring that into, kind of make sure that kind of transfers into the English language. And that's, and other things like regional, I think, sort of regional architecture and um, things like customs as well. And, you know, so to read a story, to read this horror story, then it's not, um, the reader's not only entertained by or scared, hopefully in a good way, or haunted or creeped out. They're also getting a slice of the region, the regional flavor of that where the story comes from. That's quite good. I mean, it's not just in horror stories. It's different kinds of genres and
Mhm.
also literary fiction as well that we can do that.
Yeah, that was as you were speaking, I'm trying to see if I have I don't know where I put it. I definitely had it earlier, but there is an Icelandic there was a book of basically the regional folklore and monsters in Iceland that was translated from Icelandic to English, and I think it's called the Museum of Hidden Beings, and it provides such insight, like looking into the like just so much insight into how the Icelandic people perceived the world in specific time frames, and like you can see what the looking at what they were scared of and what monsters they created to explain certain phenomena or certain situations. Um, you can learn a lot about what life day to day was like for them, right? Um, and I know I've seen discourse that falls on both sides of the spectrum of whether to use mythological creatures from different places in your fiction. Like I know in Spain, I don't have it right here. It's across the room from me, but there's an anthology that came out recently where this one author, she went around Spain to the different regions of Spain and she collected the monsters and the folklore for each of the different regions and then published them in those regional dialects of Spanish or separate languages. I guess they're all separate languages. Um, but the one of the things that came up in this convention where I bought the book, there was a panel of different like Spanish authors who are diving into the monsters of the Iberian Peninsula and the horrors and the stories that go along with them. And they were saying that the reason that they're making these books is to call attention and remind people about the culture, like these pockets of culture in the Iberian Peninsula, and then encouraging authors to use those creatures in their own writings, not just to always be using the same, like Western, like the I guess Germanic monsters that usually show up in fairy tales or horror stories. Those tropes, I think they're trying to diversify that, and so it was interesting because I've heard or I've attended a lot of panels where there's discussion about cultural appropriation and whether or not you can use, and this is, I'm sorry, this is deviating from translating a little bit, but using the horror or the creatures from one culture in like your own stories if you're not from that culture. And I lost my train of thought, but I thought it was interesting. Go ahead.
Did you say using the creature that are not from your culture?
Mhm.
Would it?
Yeah, so like taking like the Spanish authors were trying to preserve these folk tales and the folklore from their regions to get the word out that there is this history of folklore. And I think that's the same thing with the Icelandic book, was that they were trying to get the word out that there is this history of these monsters or these mythological beings that are um not as well known. And I think like in the Spanish panel, they were talking about how they actually want those to be taken and used in other cultures or in other writings by people of different cultures, just to help spread to diversify, I guess, the
Oh,
writings
so they
and the translations.
not only want people to use those different creatures from their own regions, but encourage people
Hmm.
from other places to
Hmm.
kind of make use of them too. That's fantastic. I'd love to find out what that. Oh, I mean that's in different Spanish languages, right? So I wouldn't be able to understand it.
Yeah.
But
It's a pretty book though.
fascinating read would be really fascinating read if it were in English, but then that would lose the regional language differences. But
Yeah, I knew
Yeah,
the author was pursuing, she was interested in having it all translated into English. Um, and yeah, I think that would be really cool to like get that out there.
yeah, yeah. I think that's what is making the current fantasy really interesting. That you're seeing kind of um, maybe diaspora writers um, making use of Asian mythology and fantasy, and writers working across cultures, different, taking those elements and um, spinning their own fantasy uh, stories from them, and that's how a genre. That's how these creatures remain relevant to us and um, make great stories. Um, I just hope that there is that they give them proper representation.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. That has come up with, I know with there's been a lot of calls for Greek mythology themed submissions, and I've seen a lot of discussion by Greek writers about how they are being told that their stories that they, the Greek writers, are writing and translating to English aren't Greek enough because the Western audiences are just only expecting like Western people writing Greek, using the Greek mythology as a, in some instances appropriate, like well, in many instances appropriating the Greek mythology when the Greek authors are trying to be like, here's how it actually should be, like in accordance with our culture. Here's like actually like it's actually what we would do and how to make it more representative of Greek rather than like a shell, a Greek shell looking shell on Western or like US values or other non-Greek perspectives. Like they want to bring the Greek perspective and the Greek culture to those mythologies and to new stories and new voices, but there's also been some pushback, I guess, in that it's editors aren't expecting to see what modern Greek people are writing, right? Um, so that's a challenge that can happen when translating culture, like when you're translating your own culture, I suppose, or um, as a editor, like trying to remember, like when I'm doing my reading for the Dread Machine, I try to keep a lens on at all times of is this representing a different culture? If so, how? And like, is this something where we need to talk to the author, or is it a situation where the author is like explaining their own lens and we're just not used to that? Like, yeah, um, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, so I when I go through my translations or um maybe sometimes if I'm working with other translations, I go through their translations. There is I take the editorial role as well, and that's something that I consider um, whether it's something to consult the author or something that should be worked out, um, maybe between the publisher and the editor and the translator. Um, is it a kind of a how to approach the market or house style or something, getting the author more about getting the authentic voice. Um, it's a tricky question because, I mean, in terms of Greek culture, classical Greek mythology seems to be very uh, well known around not just the Western world, but other parts of the world too. And um, something that probably children have read um, uh, as bedtime stories or grown up with around the world. And if some author from another non-Western country, they want to use this mythology and in different ways, and I think they should be able to do that. I mean, should they be able to do that? I feel like perhaps they should. I mean, because they're not. I mean, this is this concept of this particular mythical being, perhaps, let's say Medusa, she exists in the the world consciousness as one thing, and if you are making her different, then you are sort of engaging with dialogue with that cultural image. And if we want to kind of always stick with the original image, then does that make all the news stories more interesting or not? But then I do appreciate it from the other side that
Mhm.
the people who are in the Greek regions, they want to maintain um, their heritage. They want to um, be true to that, and that's also understandable. It's quite, I think, probably that's also understandable. I think probably taking care with being respectful in the
Mhm.
representation is probably the um, important thing. That I think if as long as that's there, I think it
Yeah.
would probably work out in the way that it needs to.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause it's a very sticky issue, right? Because yeah. Um, oh, I'm looking at the clock and we are at out of time. Um,
Yeah, where does the time go?
I know this
Uh,
has been fascinating.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I
We're on another panel, aren't we, tomorrow as well on my first translation?
yes, yes, I'm excited to do that one too. Um,
Yeah,
if anyone has questions, and wants to continue the discussion, I'll stick around in the Discord a little bit, and then I'll be on the panel tomorrow about the first translations with Shui-Ting, and I guess do you wanna tell people where they can find your work?
yeah. So my anthology, as I mentioned, is coming out in spring next year, and I've so you can find Synopticon that's already out, the collection of sci-fi, and then there is two books on Chinese culture, Chinese myths, which is coming out next month. Um, the the book that's already published is From Kuan Yin to Chairman Mao, an essential guide to Chinese deities. And then my website is snowpavilion.co.uk. Um, that's I semi regularly update that. I try to update it as often as I can and publish articles on it about Chinese culture and news. And then there is I'm most often on Twitter, sometimes on Instagram. Twitter is at Xuetingni, Instagram is Snow Pavilion, as in the weather and the architecture. Um, yeah, so I hope you um, get in touch and stay tuned.
Yes. And,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
uh, Monica, did you want to tell people where they can find your work too?
Yes,
Or stick around on.
yeah, I'll do just very quickly, my website is monicaluzon.com, and then I have a Twitter and an Instagram. Those are at @molo_rights, and I'll put that stuff in the Discord. And, Shuiting, you said you don't have Discord access, correct?
I don't have it yet. No,
Okay,
no.
I'll put your links in there as well so that people can find you because I think anything we put in the chat will disappear. But, uh,
Great, thank you.
thank you so much. Thanks to all the attendees.